They say children have the purest souls, untainted and innocent. But innocence is a fragile thing, a glass ornament dangling on the edge of a high shelf. And sometimes something dark reaches out from the shadows and shatters it. It started with a whisper in the night. The house sat nestled in the quiet countryside, surrounded by skeletal trees and fields of pale grass. Sarah and Daniel had moved there for peace, a slower pace of life for themselves and their 7-year-old son, Oliver. The house creaked and groaned with age, but it was theirs, a place to build memories. At first, the sleepwalking seemed innocent enough. Sarah would find Oliver wandering the hallway late at night, his eyes half closed, mumbling softly to himself. She would gently guide him back to bed, stroking his hair until he fell asleep again. But then came the whispers. It was on a cold Tuesday night when Sarah woke to find Oliver standing at the foot of their bed. His small frame was silhouetted by the pale moonlight filtering through the curtains. His head was tilted slightly downward, and his voice, soft but clear, cut through the silence. "I'm sorry. The devil told me to." Sarah froze, her breath caught in her throat. Daniel stirred beside her, muttering something incoherent before falling back into sleep. Sarah reached out with a trembling hand. "Oliver, sweetheart, what did you say?" But Oliver had already turned and shuffled back into the hallway, disappearing into the dark. The following days were steeped in unease. Oliver began drawing strange shapes on scraps of paper, symbols that Sarah didn't recognize. He spoke less and less, often staring off into space for minutes at a time. When Sarah asked him who he was talking to, he simply said, "The man in the shadows." Daniel brushed off her concerns. "Kids have imaginary friends, Sarah. It's normal. You're overthinking it." But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. One evening, while cleaning under Oliver's bed, Sarah found a small pile of objects: dead insects, shards of glass, and a single black feather. Her stomach turned. When she asked Oliver about it, his face remained blank. "He told me to keep them." Sarah didn't sleep that night. The priest arrived on a rainy Wednesday. Father Callahan was an elderly man with kind eyes and a weathered Bible clutched in his hands. The rain came down in torrents as he stepped inside, shaking droplets from his coat. The air in the house felt heavier, colder. Sarah guided Father Callahan through the home, pointing out the drawings Oliver had made, the strange markings on the walls, and the dark corner in Oliver's room where he often stared. "The shadows seem to move sometimes," Sarah whispered. The priest nodded solemnly and began his work. With each room he blessed, the air crackled with tension. His voice wavered during the prayers, as if he felt something pushing back. When they reached Oliver's room, the boy was sitting cross-legged on his bed, staring blankly at the priest. His head tilted slightly to the side, his lips curled into a faint smile. Father Callahan's hand trembled as he raised the crucifix. "You do not belong here," the priest said firmly. Oliver's eyes rolled back into his head, and a guttural, inhuman voice erupted from his small mouth. "Neither do you." The crucifix in Father Callahan's hand grew hot, and he dropped it with a gasp. Sarah screamed as Oliver's small body began to convulse violently, his limbs twisting at unnatural angles. The priest fell to his knees, clutching his rosary and muttering desperate prayers. The shadows in the room began to shift, coiling around Oliver like serpents. A lamp in the corner shattered, plunging the room into near darkness. Oliver let out a deep, guttural laugh, a sound no child should be capable of making. Father Callahan crawled backward, dragging Sarah with him. Daniel burst into the room, wide-eyed and panicked. "What's happening? What's wrong with him?" Father Callahan grabbed Daniel's arm, his voice sharp and desperate. "You must leave this room now. Take your wife and get out." But Oliver's voice, no, the voice coming from Oliver, rose above the chaos. "You cannot run. You cannot hide. This is my home now." The bulb overhead exploded, and the room was consumed by darkness. Sarah felt Daniel's hand wrap around her wrist, pulling her backward into the hallway. Father Callahan stumbled after them, slamming the door shut behind him. The three of them stood in silence, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. From behind the door, Oliver's voice sang softly, a childlike nursery rhyme twisted into something cold and sinister. "Hush, little baby. Don't say a word. The shadows come, and they will be heard." Father Callahan turned to Sarah and Daniel, his face pale, his eyes wet with tears. This isn't just sleepwalking. This isn't just a child's imagination. Something else is here, and it won't leave without taking him, or one of us, with it. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the windows like skeletal fingers. Somewhere deep within the house, Oliver laughed again. The blessing was left unfinished. Sarah found the journal 2 nights later in the attic. Its leather cover was cracked and stained with something dark. The entries inside were written in a frantic hand, detailing the slow descent of another child, a boy who lived in the same room as Oliver many years ago. The final entry read, "It comes in the night. It whispers to him. And when it's done, it will take him away." Sarah dropped the journal, her hands shaking. That night, the storm came. Oliver was missing. His bed was empty, the window wide open despite the pounding rain. Sarah and Daniel tore through the house, following faint whispers that echoed through the halls. The whispers led them to the basement. There, in the flickering light of a single bulb, stood Oliver. A circle had been etched into the dirt floor, symbols carved deep into the earth. Oliver stood at its center, his head tilted back, his mouth moving in soundless prayer. The shadows moved. They twisted and writhed along the walls, growing darker, deeper. Sarah lunged forward, but something unseen pushed her back. Daniel called out to his son, tears streaming down his face. "Oliver, come back to us. Please." For a moment, Oliver's eyes met his mother's. They were wide and glassy, a child's eyes, but something ancient and cruel looked out from behind them. "He says it's time." The shadows surged. Sarah screamed as darkness filled the basement, swallowing them whole. When the dawn broke, the house was silent. Sarah and Daniel emerged from the basement, clutching Oliver between them. The ritual circle was gone. The shadows had faded. But Oliver was different. He no longer spoke. His eyes were dull, his smile empty. Over the next few weeks, strange things continued to happen. Lights flickered, whispers echoed through the hallways, and shadows lingered longer than they should. One evening, Sarah found Oliver sitting in his room, his toys arranged in a perfect circle. In the center sat a black feather and a shard of glass. "Mommy, he says you're next." Sarah backed out of the room, her heart pounding. That night, the shadows moved again. Sarah was not the same. She began to hear whispers, even when Oliver wasn't around. Shadows danced in the corners of her vision, and her reflection in the mirror would sometimes smile when she wasn't. At night, she dreamt of the basement, of cold earth beneath her feet and eyes staring at her from the dark. One evening, Sarah was found standing in Oliver's room, staring at him as he slept. In her hand was a shard of glass. Her lips moved silently, forming words no one could hear. Daniel pulled her away, shaking her back to reality. But Sarah no longer felt like herself. The whispers were louder now, clawing at the edges of her mind. "He's inside me too now," she whispered to Daniel one night. The final straw came when Sarah disappeared. Daniel found her in the basement, kneeling in the same ritual circle where they had found Oliver. "He told me to finish it." She turned, eyes hollow and empty, and the shadows surged once again. Sometimes, innocence is just a mask, and behind it, something ancient watches and waits. If this story sent chills down your spine, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more terrifying tales. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you do if your child whispered, "I'm sorry, the devil told me to," in the dead of night? Thank you for watching Unholy Tales. Until next time, sleep tight.